Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today I would like to speak about Hidden Figures, directed by Theodore Melfi, a film based on the true story of three very special scientists which during the 60s helped NASA in bringing man into space and onto the moon. These scientists were three women, Catherine Goebel, Mary Jackson and Dorothy Vaughan. Their story is particularly special because their amazing work was carried out during times in which women weren't considered suitable to perform certain jobs. Because although the first steps were being made in order to obtain rights for women, they were still subconsciously considered underperforming and less able than men. And although Catherine, Mary and Dorothy were absolute geniuses, they were also discriminated because of their skin colour. The film is actually based on the novel Hidden Figures, the African-American women who helped win the space race by Margot Lee Shetterly, whose father actually worked at NASA. The main character is Catherine, portrayed by Taraji Henson, a mathematician which since an early age could tackle all sorts of numbers. She is offered a job within the Space Task Group where she helps her fellow scientists in calculating the necessary math to bring man into space and safely back on Earth. Most of her colleagues within this group were men which were definitely not used to being overtaken by a woman, and the calculations they were tackling could be compared to exploring maths. Because they had limited information, the details they needed were constantly changing and they didn't have modern computers, hence the title Hidden Figures, so math just beyond human comprehension. But Catherine was an absolute genius in her field and managed to tackle these numbers and give a fundamental help to her colleagues, regardless of the discrimination she suffered. Luckily, the leader of her team, Mr. Harrison, portrayed by Kevin Costner, never discriminated her and even took action in order to make her feel more at ease during her work. Catherine's two best friends and colleagues are Mary Jackson, an aspiring engineer portrayed by Janelle Monáe, which we also recently saw in Moonlight, and Dorothy Vaughan, portrayed by Octavia Spencer, leader of a group of women called Coloured Computers. Dorothy is often bossed around by her supervisor, Miss Mitchell, portrayed by Kirsten Dunst, which tries to appear polite and understanding, but whose attitude still shows signs of stiffness and doubt towards the coloured group. Catherine, Dorothy and Mary carried out their work in the most humble and silent manner, and although they demanded their basic rights, they always avoided going against the authorities and risking losing their jobs. So they preferred to keep their head low, and if they had to take action they would always do it respectfully, following the law. And although they were often the fundamental mind behind some important projects at NASA, their name never made the headline. So the title Hidden Figures doesn't only refer to the maths that was involved at NASA, but also it refers to these women, these figures which were always kept hidden, whose names never made the headline and whose tasks were carried out without the world even knowing of their existence. We often hear about the astronauts, their brave missions into space, but I personally had never heard of Catherine. I never even studied her at school, but if it hadn't been for her silent work, her determination and her genius mind, we would have probably studied much less about man in space. We also tend to think that discrimination was a thing of centuries ago, but this film proves that discrimination was going on 30 years before I was born. So it's incredible and infuriating seeing how laws have only just recently changed. Catherine has to run a mile just to use what is considered the coloured restroom. Her colleagues look at her with disgust when she touches their coffee pot. Dorothy is treated as a criminal just for visiting the white section of the library with her children. They will eat in a separate cantina, they sit at the back of the bus and so on. And this is just a few decades ago. And Hidden Figures speaks about two types of discrimination, because Mary, Catherine and Dorothy are also discriminated because they are women. People constantly doubted about their abilities. More than once in the film we have lines such as, "I didn't know they hired ... or I didn't know women could do ... The characters in the film prove to be strong and independent, and they carry out tasks which stereotypically would be assigned to a man. Dorothy easily repairs electronic equipment and cars. Catherine is a single mum with 3 children and represents her family's only income. Mary always makes her voice be heard and doesn't let herself be intimidated by men. But these women always remain humble, and I love how the film portrayed these characters as normal women, and how it shows us that history has been made by common people, single mothers, young students, and not some super women. History has been changed by common common people with strong moral principles, which have worked hard all their life for their rights, and which demanded these rights even without violence. I also spoke about this fact in my review of Loving, a film set in 1958 and which also concerns the topic of discrimination, because in Loving we have the story of a couple, the Loving, Sir Richard and Mildred Loving, which couldn't marry because of the laws concerning what was considered interracial marriage. And basically in Loving, the people that changed America's history were common people who had probably never even sat in an attorney's office. They didn't resist the law, they didn't fight back when arrested, they just silently and humbly demanded their basic rights, changing thousands of other lives. And this proves that we don't need a Superman or a Superwoman to change the world. Anybody can do it, even the most common everyday people. And also, as I said again in my video about Loving, we tend to think that discrimination is a thing of the past, but unfortunately it still is present. And these hidden figures in our past place the foundations for our future work. They gave us the example, but now we have the means to change the world. Hidden Figures has had enormous success. It has already won 2 Golden Globe Awards, and now it is nominated for 3 Academy Awards, so 3 Oscars. And as I said before, I personally really enjoyed this film. I'm not sure whether it would deserve Best Picture, because there are other films which I preferred, such as Arrival. I don't think it's still on that level, although the information in this film and the story it shows is absolutely fantastic. It is a part of our history which most of us didn't even know about. But considering it just as a film, I think that probably Arrival would probably beat it at the Oscars. So in the last months we have 2 very important films portraying the struggles that have happened in our recent past, so it's just a few decades ago. So Loving and Hidden Figures, they both speak of similar topics, so the denial of basic rights, but in a different way. Obviously there is a different tone to the 2 films. So Hidden Figures has a lot of comedy in it, whereas Loving doesn't have that much comedy. It's more of a dramatic film. But in the end, they both speak of very similar topics. They were only set, I think, about 5 years apart. I think Loving is set in 1958, and if I'm not mistaken, Hidden Figures is set in 1963. So we're living in the same situation. Let me know what you thought about Hidden Figures with a comment here below, maybe in comparison to Loving, and make sure to subscribe for many more movie-related videos. See you soon, bye!